Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on ChumbaCasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Coincidence? I think not. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere, even at 30,000 feet. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's ChumbaCasino.com and live the Chumba life.
No purchase necessary. VGW. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
Hi everyone, I'm Deb Flashenberg. Welcome to Yoga, Birth, Babies, a podcast produced by Prenatal Yoga Center. We will be diving into everything prenatal yoga, birth, and baby related, hoping to inspire, educate, and empower you through your journey into motherhood. Thank you for listening. Hi everyone, I'm Deb Flashenberg. I'm your host for Yoga Birth Babies, and today I talk with Rhea Dempsey. She is a childbirth educator, a trainer, a birth attendant, a doula, and a counselor. She has a wealth of information. I first heard Rhea during the Better Birth 360 Summit, and I heard her speak, and the whole time I just kept thinking, yes, everything she said, yes. And so I kind of hunted her down, and we organized our time. She's in Australia, and she talks a lot about pain for a benefit of the laboring person, about functional pain versus pathological pain, how to cope, the support that a person needs during labor. It's a fascinating, rich conversation. I will also say that some of the recording gets a little finicky. So the information is fantastic. If you can kindly try to move through some of the finicky moments of the recording where it's a little quiet, I think it's well worth just trying to struggle for a second or two. It comes back. Our sound engineer did a great job with that. But what Rhea has to say is amazing. And those that support laboring people, those that will be moving through their own birth experience soon, I think it's really rich in information. The one thing that I also just want to highlight, she talks about this thing called the crisis of confidence, and I had not heard that term. And for anyone that's been in labor, watched labor, moving through it soon, it's something to really focus on and learn about, because it's just a piece of information that I hadn't heard and I think can really be a game changer for how the rest of your labor unfolds. That's just a little tidbit into the conversation. Also, a quick reminder, if you haven't had a chance, please go to iTunes or Stitcher and leave and rate and review the podcast. It's another way for the community to continue to grow. And last little thing, I feel like I'm PBS, that public service station, asking for donations, but that's exactly what I'm doing. So we now have a donation button on the Yoga Birth Babies page on our website, Prenatal Yoga Center. And it's a way to help keep the podcast functional and running. It just helps support the podcast and keeping everyone that's involved getting some gratitude and benefit from it. So please, if it's in your heart, please take a moment and go to our donation page and leave us a little something. Enjoy the podcast. Thank you.
Okay, round two. Name something that's not boring.
A laundry? Ooh, a book club. Computer solitaire, huh?
Ah, sorry, we were looking for Chumba Casino. That's right, ChumbaCasino.com has over 100 casino-style games. Join today and play for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Hi, Rhea. Thank you so much for spending some time with me tonight.
So beautiful to be here with you, Deb.
Yes, so for listeners, it's kind of a wacky time for me. I don't usually record at night, but we've got a little bit of a time difference because Rhea's off in Australia and I am sitting here in New Jersey. So it's going to be a fun conversation. So Rhea, I would just love to jump into the work you do and what brought you to that.
Okay, yes. So I became involved in the birth world nearly 40 years ago. Well, it is 40 years ago, 41 years ago, actually, with the birth of my own first daughter. And she was born in England, actually. And just a little background. I, at that point, was a physical education teacher and an outdoor adventure facilitator and what have you. So I had a strong relationship with my body as a working body, knowing what it can do. And so I assumed that birthing would just capitalize on all of that I felt like I could trust my body and work with it. And went into one of the large, as I learnt later, teaching hospitals in London, expecting that would be, my capacity would be honoured and that I would be supported to do the work that my body was, designed and able to do. Only to find that, in fact, that birth didn't really go the way I thought, which would have been, I thought, sort of a natural birth, but it sort of got hijacked by what I came to understand later was much more around this sort of clash of philosophies and also just ways of being with me, in particular, that became sort of more punitive as the birth went on. And now, of course, we know so much more about the hormones and what that all means in terms of a woman's body. So at that point, I didn't really understand that. I just came out of that birth experience, beautiful baby, me healthy, all fine. But coming out thinking, what happened there? Just what happened? I went in feeling like that and then came out really feeling like I was feeling like my body didn't work, rather than understanding it was the interaction about what was happening. So that, in a way, radicalized me quite quickly around the birth issues. And here I am still 40 years later, pretty much more radicalized probably than I was then, because I understand it more. I understand the breadth. I also understand the importance much more. And also now I have 4 grandchildren, which makes me feel even more passionate, thinking further into the future and what all this means about birth.
So were your other births different? How did they differ?
Yeah. So we came back to Australia and had my second 2 daughters here and had home births for them, so that really, and not so much even at that point in choosing the first home birth, I just felt like if I went back into a hospital, I didn't know whether I could stand in that space and refuse things or say what I wanted. I just felt like I might not be able to protect myself in that space, and I felt like being in a home would really. So it was more out of a bit of fear of the hospital rather than in it fully embracing, the beauty that home birth can be. But nonetheless, that's what it was. It was such a glorious, glorious baby girl born on a Saturday afternoon, big party as we did it in the early home birth days, and just like a great celebration. And then the third baby again at home, another daughter, and she sort of slipped in on a Wednesday morning, very workaday in the middle of the week, coming into the family. So just gorgeous, gorgeous births. Yes.
So can you talk a little bit about the work that you do?
Okay, so in all of that time then, not long after, so my first daughter was born in England, but she was 4 months old when we came back to Australia. And I, as luck or fate or something would have it, had a number of friends who were pregnant, of course, around the same time. And one of them asked me to come and she was having her second baby at home, and asked me to come and be with her toddler, at the birth, to be sort of with minding her toddler during the birth. But you know what those second babies can do. They can be pretty fast on out of there. And as it turned out, really nobody else was there but her partner and myself. And he was a little bit freaked out, so I caught the baby. And so that rather hooked me into the whole world of birthing. And so then it happened that another friend also, so before I was pregnant with my next baby, I went to that birth and that baby came rushing out. Then I was pregnant with my second daughter, and there was another friend having a home birth, and a similar thing happened. So I got pretty swept up in how delicious all of that was, as well as then having my own birth experiences. So then after my second babe, so I was a bit immersed in the birth scene then and the home birth scene. And then I did training as a childbirth educator. So I'm now a childbirth educator, an independent childbirth educator. And I guess back then we weren't really using the term doula. We were calling ourselves birth attendants, so that was women who were attending births and supporting at births, in particular home births, but not then more and more into hospital as well. So I called myself a birth attendant, but really you would call me a doula. And then maybe many years down the track, I went back to university and did counselling and psychology because I felt like a lot of what I was seeing and supporting and working with around birth had as much to do with the heart and mind as it did with the body. And so I did that. And so now it's like I've got a counsellor hat on, a birth counsellor, and sadly do far too much birth debriefing, and a doula and a childbirth educator, and just generally passionate activist woman of birth, really.
I love it. And, I do think the counselor part probably serves you very well, having that deeper understanding. That's actually something, I'm not a counselor. My husband's a social worker, so we talk things through a lot about these things. But I do think that training is probably, as you said, postpartum helpful, but it can probably dig into some of the stuff prenatally, like let's look at your fears. Let's really kind of dig in what might subconsciously be lingering. So that's something I wish everyone had.
Yes.
All right. So let's talk a little bit. When I was listening to you on the Birth Summit, which I thought you were fantastic on, you went into something called the 3 C's that became a theme of one of my classes because it just made such sense, but I loved it. Will you talk about that?
Yes, I'm more than happy. I think, for those of us who've been around the birth scene over a long period of time, like over a few decades, then of course we're seeing lots of births. I've been to lots of births. And there's something, of course, about birth which is the same through generations, we hope. But get a bit of a look at what's happening in the culture. And I'm pretty sure, I know that in America the stats that you have about birth are very similar to us here in Australia. So I'm assuming what I'm saying about what I see in Australia is very relevant, as you say, to what's happening in America. So I've come to see that what I call the 3 C's, that women, the sort of cultural message about birth, I describe in this idea of these 3 C's. So one is that women are getting this incredibly strong message about the fact that they can be and that they should be comfortable in labour. And of course, it's the epidural that really, the seduction of the epidural that really enables that message to become solid. And so there, even women who I'm sure the same sort of women that you're working with coming to do yoga work and work with their bodies towards their birth. So I call the women who would seek me out willing women. So they're women who still feel, even though they don't really have to in the way the birth culture is at the moment, but they're still women who want to engage with their bodies and their babies and the whole process of birth and work towards that normal physiological childbirth. So, but the cultural message tells them that, in fact, they should be comfortable. And this, even for those willing women, is so sort of culturally embedded now that, and there's another aspect that, that they should be comfortable, because there's sort of this whole idea of in a way, pitying labouring women, pitying the poor things that they have to suffer that terrible pain of labour. And why should they? And they don't have to, because we can save them, because we can use that epidural and then it can all be pain-free. So they're getting this strong message about comfort. And as I say, even the women I'm sure that you're working with, or the women that I'm working with, and they're in themselves working towards a different embracing of the pain. But in the midst of the labour, of course, when it gets a bit tough, that cultural message about, oh, you can be comfortable, you should be comfortable, why aren't you comfortable, we can make you comfortable, starts to come into her thoughts and feelings. And she herself then is thinking, oh, yes, I would rather be comfortable, and maybe it would be good to be comfortable, and all those other people were right, and so on, so on. So that message about comfort is so limiting to the capacity of women to embrace the sort of intensity and the work of labour, the work of working with their body. So that's one aspect, this message about comfort. So I guess if I'm thinking about how women might counteract that in their lives as they're preparing for the birth, one is, of course, to to be educated around really what's happening in labour and what that energy in their body is and what it's doing and how it's helping the baby to be born and so on. And perhaps in a little while I'll also talk, there's some absolutely magic knowledge that they need to know about that, which is the way the hormones work to bring about the sort of instinctive capacity for birthing. And it's certainly not through being comfortable. So we'll come to that in a little while. So firstly, getting educated around really what's going on. They also, I guess, need to, in my classes, I talk about, well, if they're aspirational about birth, about that normal physiological childbirth, sorry about that, in normal physiological childbirth, if they're aspirational but the culture hardly ever supports it, then they've got to be very savvy about the choices that they're making, and they've got to be savvy about, who are they in their lives? Who are they in their lives in terms of around this issue about comfort? Do they have lived values in terms of working with their body for their health and fitness and well-being and capacity? Or are they really into comfort in a big way and, don't do very much that's engaging with their body through those levels of comfort to discomfort into that sort of transforming of pain into power and so on? So they've got to be pretty realistic. And if that's not how they live generally, then certainly in the pregnancy they've got a bit of a crash course to have to shape that a little. So they're key things. And then also, and I'll talk about this a little bit more later, that really who they have with them at the birth, their support and the caregivers that they're working with. It's like the whole attitudes of everybody in that birth space start to come into play in that labour around this issue of comfort. So I'll expand on that a little bit more later. So that's the first C, is about comfort. The next C, which is pretty amazing to me to have watched this happen over decades, but we've gotten into this point about thinking that birth should be convenient. Should be convenient. Which, is just a pretty crazy way to be thinking about it because, we know that if we're thinking about normal physiological childbirth, then really the baby could come anywhere across, like a 4-week to 5-week period of time, a few weeks before supposed due date or a few weeks after due date. And in the past, and I'm talking just in my own past, back through these 30, 40 years, in the early time, we weren't really thinking like that. Everybody's just thinking and waiting on the baby. Oh, yeah, the baby. So it's sort of like culturally, socially, family circles, within the relationship, there was just much more fluidity about, well, I wonder when this baby will come. Whereas now, of course, it's much more within the couple relationship, and particularly now that partners are present at the birth, of course, their work colleagues and everybody that there's so much more pressure and probably investment in, when will this baby be born? Because certainly much easier to know that the baby's going to be induced on the Monday morning and everybody can plan around it and grandparents can fly in from interstate. And so that idea of convenience rather than waiting on the baby and prioritising sort of the baby's readiness, it's more about what are the social and cultural and work factors that press in upon knowing when that baby's going to be born. And of course, with the, it's sort of, I think in America you call it Pitocin, we call it Syntocinon over here, but using Pitocin or, of course, elective caesareans, we can make birth much more convenient. And in Australia, our figures are for induced births, 29% of births are induced now, and elective caesars are 21%. So, getting quite high in terms of not that the only reason for doing those things is about convenience, but it's sort of like it's tipping that balance into feeling like socially, culturally, relationally, we could make choices about when that baby's going to be born to make it all much more convenient. So I've seen that change. So again, for women preparing for birth to be not hijacked by that sort of social and cultural expectation, they need to really check in, well, how is that in their life? How fluid is it? How are there people around, not even so much the mother? Mind you, in late pregnancy, lots of women do get to a point where they feel like, oh, I'm over this, it's getting all too... And so it gets to be a bit tricky to be waiting on that baby, or what I call graciously waiting on that baby. They can get a bit grumpy about it and start to be seduced a little bit by thinking, oh, well, because probably I think that part of this convenience and the fact of inductions and things being so high is it robs women of their absolute right to whinge a little bit in late pregnancy about, oh, it's getting hard, particularly if it's in the middle of a heat wave or something, instead of being supported and said, yes, it is hard waiting on babies, but it's so important that you wait on that baby. Instead of getting that, what they get told is, oh, I'm sure somebody, won't your doctor induce you, or just why can't you get the baby induced? And so you shouldn't have to suffer like this or something. So there's a whole undermining of that capacity of women and to support them through what can sometimes be a bit challenging in late pregnancy. So for a whole lot of social, cultural understandings, this idea of convenience, and of course it's mediated through the capacity with the synthetic hormones. So that's convenience. So they need to check that and protect themselves. Have people around who can give them the nurture they need in late pregnancy if they're finding it difficult to wait on that baby. Mm-hmm. In that, I'm remembering my eldest daughter who had the first grandchild in our, the next generation, and that baby boy really took us all. He was a 3 weeks past due date. We were all, really trying to encourage him to come. Eventually, beautiful home birth all went very straightforwardly, but it can be quite taxing, particularly when the cultural message that she was getting from just about everybody else was, we should get that baby induced. So that's the convenience one. And then the final C I talk about is control. And this is happens at quite a few levels, really. So one, what I've seen is, if we're talking about the birth culture itself or the system, then there are many more control factors coming in there, partly because the interventions can be done, but also in Australia at least, there's sort of big baby booms, and so the stress on the numbers of babies being born and having to get that throughput in the institutions to get the babies born and so on. So there's sort of getting to be a workplace control over. And because, of course, they can induce or they're elected, so they're just slotting. So there's something about that, about controlling that flow of how it happens in terms of an institutional sense. There's also, I think, the message that comes out of the being comfortable. Some part of that is also dampening down the woman's exuberant expressions or the birth song, the birth singing that a woman really in the instinctive throes of labour would be expressing. So that's quite confronting for some people because they don't necessarily understand, they don't see it with the beautiful eyes that we see it when we see it happening. They're seeing it somehow or other in, oh, the poor thing. So the control and the comfort about the pain, they seem to go a bit together from the point of view of the caregivers, as well as, of course, lots of women are getting the message that they should be controlling themselves, that they should be in control of, or they can be, that the whole thing can be controlled.
You've worked hard for what you have, your money, your assets, your 401k, and home. Isn't it all worth protecting? Nearly 1 in 4 consumers have been a victim of identity theft. LifeLock Ultimate Plus helps protect your finances with up to $3 million in reimbursement. LifeLock alerts you to identity threats you might miss. And if your identity is stolen, your dedicated U.S.-based restoration specialist will work to fix it. Let LifeLock help protect what you've worked so hard for. Save 25% off your first year on LifeLock Ultimate Plus at LifeLock.com/aware. Terms apply.
Step into the world of power, loyalty, and luck.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
With family, cannolis, and spins mean everything.
Now, you wanna get mixed up in the family business.
Introducing The Godfather at ChumbaCasino.com. Test your luck in the shadowy world of The Godfather slot.
Someday, I will call upon you to do a service for me.
Play The Godfather, now at ChumbaCasino.com.
Welcome to the family.
VGW Group. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
I see a lot of women talk about they're embarrassed by what their body may do or the sounds they may make, or, I mean, especially during the pushing stage, like where there might be some pooping. So I see the control about shame in how instinctual birth can start to unfold, how primal it can get. And then I've seen the other side where some women just kind of drink that in. They're like, yeah, I'm just going to kind of dive into that. But I do think there's some embarrassment, because we're in such a controlled, society where, everyone's kind of put together nicely. I shouldn't say everyone, but maybe someone wants to be always put together nicely. And then to have that loss of control could be overwhelming.
I talk about in my classes that, 21st century latte sipping, Brunswick chic. It's not quite the same picture if women are surrendering into that primal instinctive space. And so that's again more of a cultural and social challenge for many women. So first of all, they need education to understand how important that primal state is in the birth, and we'll talk about that a bit more later. But also, what preparation they can do before the birth is, of course, they need to be checking, if it's a woman who wants to have a doll, that she really needs to be checking in about, well, where does she sit around that issue? Is her life entirely controlled? Does she control all the aspects about herself, but then expect to know how to drop into her instincts immediately she's in labour? Or how much is she living in an instinctive life now? Is she following in late pregnancy? Is she following a clock about everything she's doing? Or is she able to follow the rhythms of her body about when she needs rest, when she needs to eat, when she needs activity, when she needs to be walking? What's her baby asking? Is she able to drop into that rhythm of the body, which is much more akin to dropping then further into the instincts about birth? Or in fact, is her lifestyle, her needs, her way of being in the world because of other pressures causing her to just stay in that, having to control everything she's doing and not rest when her body is calling out to rest, but because she needs to be fulfilling some other obligations, and she can only rest when the clock says that, or she can only get up when the clock, and so on, so on. So that aspect about how does her, in a main general sort of lifestyle, support being able to go with that, following her body. And of course we know, separate to the birth, we know this is such an important factor for postnatal life, because of course that baby, that instinctive sort of evolutionary baby, doesn't know anything about, clocks or timing or schedules or what have you. So for the mother in late pregnancy and then in the birth and then on into the time with that early time with the baby particularly, so important to be able to surrender and follow that lead rather than feel like you're controlling all of that. And I don't know whether in America you have this as well, but there is that control issue is spilling over into many ways of trying to control babies.
Yeah, I see that. Yeah, schedules are pretty tight with some. I want to shift over to something that, again, so much of what you say just really resonates because I incorporate like the control stuff in class. I'm like having them make sounds to get used to it. But something you said about the functional birth, I read some of your stuff, and versus pathological pain. So functional pain versus pathological. Huge, because we often label pain under one category, but it's not the same. So can you go deeper into that?
So important. And I guess this comes out of my physical education background, and as I'm sure with you, with coming from a yoga background, that certainly there is pain which needs to be relieved and handled because this is pathological pain. Where something is going wrong in the body, there's danger or disease or damage, and that needs to be attended to. But that's not what we're talking about in terms of birth, and that's not what I would be talking about if I was dealing with a physical education class, or I was being a personal trainer, or in terms of you with your yoga. What we're talking about then is what I just called, describing functional physiological pain. And this is the functional physiological pain of your body working strong and hard, and in labour it's working strong and hard really at peak performance levels. This functional physiological pain of the muscles striving, of that getting that energy in the body, the breath in, the energy it takes to stay present, that strength of the stretch receptors and all of that. So this is much more akin to, there are people, I'm sure in America too, there are people who, they're getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning to go out and get that feeling, running around the block. Or we talk about doing fun runs here, And when you ask people, did they have much fun? And they say, no, the start was fun and the end was fun, but in between was a lot of hard work. And it's a bit like that in birthing. So that functional physiological pain is about the healthy pain of your body doing what it can do, but it's intense, that embracing of that intensity of that effort as your body is opening and working. And not that I'm a yoga person, but I mean, I'm sure you're using language somewhere, something about that in terms of stretching and moving into the possibility of what your body can.
I call it safe sensation. It's safe but intense. So it's not something that's going to hurt them, but it's not, I don't approach the asana practice that they shouldn't have discomfort. Like, I want them to be safely uncomfortable so that they can recognize when they are uncomfortable, what coping skills can they use, and that at that moment, during a birth, during, a contraction, there's no escape. So a learning to actually surrender to great discomfort, but recognize it's safe. Which, and I think that's what a lot of people, they hit discomfort and automatically something's wrong. But recognizing the body's producing this and it's totally safe for you.
And I think that another part of that, which is sort of subliminal, but obvious, but subliminal, is, of course, that we place birth in hospital. And in the main, pain in hospital is about things going wrong in the body and escalating pain that's getting more and more intense and going on for a long period of time is really seen as being very serious in terms of a danger signal. And we place birth in the middle of that. And so there's a blurring in terms of this. And lots of couples assume that they're not educated to understand that in labour it's going to intensify. So when it does intensify, I get this a lot in birth debriefing, is that they are thinking something is going wrong and it's getting worse and worse and worse. That the pain that they're feeling in labour is actually a signal about whether things are safe or not, or there's danger happening or not, which would be appropriate in a hospital setting with anything else going on in your body. But in labour, no, the intensification is in fact the pathway. It's the pathway to the changing hormones, the pathway to the birth, the pathway to the shift in consciousness, the pathway to all the brilliant things about birth is that intensification. So there's a lot of work to be done, I think, for those of us who are interested in supporting normal physiological childbirth, interested in supporting women to achieve that and to work towards that, to really educate clearly about what is going on around this pain issue, rather than, as you say, just pain is pain is pain and lumping it all in together. If we're thinking also about that in terms of preparation for women before the birth, just like you're saying, women need to be, there are some aspirational values that women can bring into birthing, but they need to be grounded on some pretty solid lived values. And one of them would be around this issue of functional physiological pain. If they haven't experienced that in their life, if they're not moving their bodies in with some sort of intensity or moving into some of those stretch receptors or the body working in that way, and yet they're expecting to breathe their way through the labour, it's just pretty well not going to work. So that thing about whether I think yoga is a beautiful practice for preparation for birth, because you're moving into stretch, that feeling of stretch, working into intensity, knowing that you can use your breath to do that. So if they're not doing some yoga or some walking or something where they're feeling that intensity and able to work with it and surrender into it, then, that's really the work that they need to be doing at that physical level as that preparation, and particularly because again, even if we know that, for normal physiological childbirth, being active and using positions that come from your birthing instincts to open your body, if women find it even difficult to hold their own weight or be able to kneel or bend or, heaven forbid, go into a squat, if they can't even do that with their body, let alone then with having contractions in the midst of all of that, then that's certainly going to make a big challenge where they reach points what I call crisis of confidence in the labour. And it's at that point that really the cultural message about your poor thing, you should be comfortable and we can make you comfortable and the epidural can do it for you, is the big seduction that happens at that point, which really then hijacks what their intentions were. So that's where I talk about that functional physiological pain. And not only the women, But anybody who's with the mother, partners included, so important that they understand that this is really about a body working strong and hard, healthily, fantastically, as it's designed to do, and working towards that, beautiful.
Well, let's jump in that then. So let's talk about the support team, because I have seen, and as a doula, and I'm sure you've seen as a doula, I think the support team gets freaked out sometimes if they haven't seen physiological birth and they're seeing these very big sensations in these kind of primal sounds and movements. I've seen many well-meaning, loving, fantastic partners retreat, and from their fear, actually, I see them that they tend to, and I'm not everyone, but some tend to be the one that starts to bring back, did you want to talk about pain relief? Where the mom had said no. So what advice would you give the support team to not get scared and to create, I call it circling the wagons, that they can really create that space for her to be in without their background and nervousness and anxiety and, I guess, idea of labor?
One part of it, of course, education again, to be educated about what that's about. I would think also probably that finding on, because now, of course, there's lots of videos online in various places, to be finding videos that are really showing women instinctively working strongly with their labour and sort of get a bit acclimatised about what it really looks like. Often birth video, and I'm not talking about birth videos where we're seeing women who are not well supported, who are in a lot of panic and screaming and what have you, but really women who are deep in that work of working with their body instinctively, so they want those sort of videos. They also don't want to see videos that are just showing the action with some beautiful music over the top. We want them to be having a sense of what the sounds are, what the birth song sounds like, what that singing is, and also to at least see a few of those so that they can normalize, oh, okay, that's what I'm in there for. That's one thing to have. The other thing I think is, of course, because with what you're describing about seeing that the partners are starting to get a bit freaked out, but of course that role of somebody who's not freaked out, who can then support not only the woman, but can, give the heads up to the partner that, it's getting exciting now, and this is really what we've been waiting for, and that if you've got a good relationship with them, then that can be very soothing to them at the same time. But I think in situations where you don't have anybody in the room who can normalise what's happening and can reassure that this is just so potent and powerful rather than a freak out, then of course it will get hijacked at that point because of what I call those pain dynamics. And the research says that in fact the higher numbers of partners who are more satisfied with the birth when epidural is involved rather than if they're not. And I'm sure that's really talking about exactly this issue of partners not being supported, educated and supported enough to understand what that rarefied atmosphere of a birth is, what that intensity looks and sounds like, and how to be present in that space to support a woman to move through as she's working with that labour. Maybe just one other thing I might say in that. Another thing that I've found that people misinterpret, because we placed it in the hospital situation, but in that beautifully unfolding labour where those hormones really doing their magic, and when actually, mate, I'm going to take a step back because there's a few things I'm going to hit with this description, yeah? So just to first of all talk about the hormones, and we know so much more about them now, and, we have to credit Dr. Sarah Buckley for her beautiful work, which you would know is on Childbirth Connection over there for free, to explain so much more about the hormones. Other researchers as well, but that's a beautiful place to understand. I'm speaking much more simplistically. So we're talking about that functional physiological pain, yeah? So that is driven in the main by oxytocin, what I call queen oxytocin, not to be confused with synthetic forms in America called Pitocin, and over here we call it syntocinon. But queen oxytocin, naturally occurring, multitasking goddess of a hormone who drives the big strong contractions, i.e. drives the functional physiologically painful experiences of the contractions opening the mother's body, As well, of course, she opens our hearts and our feelings to bond and fall in love with that baby. So brilliant. So queen oxytocin, she's driving those big, strong contractions. So this is driving then the intensification of the functional physiological pain. Now, when we reach a particular point in the labour, and it's usually around that 6 or 7 centimetres, where there's a particular intensity is coming from those naturally occurring contractions, then the oxytocin kicks in the endorphins. And the endorphins, as most people will know, are sort of our feel-good hormones, but the endorphins really, we can get some good endorphins if we eat a bit of chocolate or if we're in a sweet vibe with some friends or family. But we get highest levels of endorphins in our body when we're experiencing high levels of functional physiological pain. So a lot of people would understand this in terms of, say, being a runner or a swimmer.
The runner's high, yeah.
The runner's high that comes where they're reaching a pain barrier. And if they're supported to move through that, then they get that runner's high as that endorphins come through. So this is the link between the functional physiological pain with the endorphins and the oxytocin and the endorphins. Now, in birthing, when those endorphins come through, they help to moderate the pain, as they do with the runner's high. They give an uplift on feeling. But another thing they do, because the endorphins are like our natural opiates in our body. And if you've ever been around somebody or seen or on telly or what have you, somebody with a whack of opiates in their body, then they go on the nod. Because what the opiates, the endorphins do is they swamp the cerebral cortex. They take out that sharp, bright, thinking brain and drop. So we're thinking about this in terms of the labouring woman. So when this point comes with the contractions being strong enough, more intense, through the oxytocin driving them, the functional physiological pain then trips over the endorphins. The endorphins then come in to give some support, but the most important thing the endorphins do is that they take out the cerebral cortex, which knows fuck all about birthing, excuse the language, but the sooner it's out of the picture, the better. And this is happening through the hormones. So then the mother, in a way, starts to look like she's going on the nod. And then we see, for those of us who know the magic of this, we see just things are just going to go so brilliantly from here. In between contractions, she's like she's in a deep trance or a deep space where she's not really aware of what's going on. She's very internal. But what it looks like on the outside is that here is a woman who looks exhausted. She can, if they're in tubs, we've got to sort of hold their head up, otherwise they would sink down under the water. They're just very drifty and inwardly focused in between contractions, sort of stirring to work with a contraction. They sometimes themselves might say things like, I'm just feeling exhausted. I'm so tired, so tired. And, of course, if they've been up through the night, everybody can be lulled and seduced into thinking that they are exhausted and tired. But no, they're not. They're endorphined. And we know this, those of us who've seen it over and over again, because we see as the labour progresses and they're coming close into second stage, all of a sudden there's a big shunt of adrenaline that wakes them up and they've got energy to burn to push that baby out. But if you've never seen it, and what I hear in a lot of birth debriefings is that the couple are feeling like she is exhausted at that point, the partner feels like she's exhausted, and the caregivers, often who have never seen this whole thing unfold in its natural, instinctive and hormonal state, somebody might come and say, look, she's only 7 centimetres and she's still got to do the extra part of that, and then she's got to push the baby out. She's so exhausted. We think we should put up an epidural. She can get some sleep, and then that will be better for later on, which really is misinterpreting what is actually happening. This is a beautiful hormonal state, the supporter of the including in that instance. Mm-hmm. Education around that as well. It's supportive to the partners. So then partners, and I use beautiful videos in my workshops to really show exactly all of these things happening. And so then after the birth, if I see people, I say, oh yeah, and then I could see that she's just dropping into those endorphins were coming through. It was so exciting, instead of freaking out and thinking, she's exhausted or something else. So I think that's a bit of education that we really need to be sharing.
And it's a great way for someone to recognize that, and we're going to kind of put in, again, functional pain, how it can benefit a laboring woman. Because then we tend to have, as a society, a little bit of demonizing pain or pitying her because of it, but it can actually really put the trajectory into we're moving. This is actually helping you.
I think it's one of the magic keys at that moment when that functional physiological pain, embracing it, working with it, and it starts to tip over that hormonal system. Then the cerebral cortex is able to the instinctive capacity that the mother comes forward. Sit back and glorify. Mm-hmm. Just sit back and we're just in awe of watching that unfold. In that
it's been amazing. I remember the first birth I saw like that. I just was kind of watching her. It was my friend Liz. She wrote all about it. Just watching her in this state of, she described it as the closest thing to, I think she did an LSD trip without the drugs. All right, so I want to shift a little bit to, you mentioned crisis of confidence. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so really that sits a lot on top of the things that we've been talking about. Yeah? The cultural and social messages, which are saying you poor thing, don't have to be comfortable, you should be comfortable. Also, I guess generally in our populations, we're getting more and more sedentary. The more and more labour-saver devices we have, the less and less we're having to do any labours. And so unless people are actively choosing a lifestyle of moving with their body and working with their body, lots of us, about the only part of our body that might need get a natural workout might be our remote control finger here. So that idea of not having experienced anything much intense in the body in terms of physical efforts, and then going into labour without, a step-by-step experience of something more intense, then I think that what I found. So to come back to this idea of the crisis of confidence. So these are some of the social and cultural factors. So I think you'd be familiar with a lot of the birth writers talk about that the part in labour, the transition, late in first speech, that sort of 8 through to 10 centimetres is going to be the most intense, and that's when the women are really going to lose it and they're just going to be in a freak out and blah, blah, blah. So I think there was a birth that I was at, I write about it in my first book, where I had known the mother had a much more challenging, she had another challenging story, life story, that in knowing how births work in terms of the psychological and emotional stuff, I was predicting it was going to be a long and very difficult labour. She was up for it. She invited me to be at the birth. She was going to be at a birth centre where she was going to be well supported by experienced midwives, the capacity to be in the water and so on, so on. So I felt like she was aware of what was going to bring for her. She felt that she was up for it, and she made good choices about who was with her to work her with it. The midwife, it's a longer story, but what happened in the end, before I got there, the mother had gone into this big distress state, and the midwife was interpreting that she was in transition. Yeah, so quite close to pushing the baby out. And the midwife, who knew me, rang me and said, Rhea, you better get here quick. She's in transition. She's starting to push, and soon the baby will be here, and you'll miss it if you don't. And as I was driving to the birth centre, I was a bit surprised, feeling, it's quite good, Rhea, to have your pet ideas blown out of the water. But when I got there, again, I could see why the midwife was feeling like, you could read it as transition, but I was still feeling like I don't feel like that's what's happening.
Was she panicking? Was it more panic than?
A lot of distress and whatever, yeah. So as it turned out, eventually vaginal examination was done and she was 2 centimetres. So we then had to do a big regrouping. She went home with her partner and came back later. Eventually, she was back in that tub and had that baby beautiful with a lot harder work being done. But when I talked to the midwife was very, very surprised. She was just quite shocked about misreading that and then here. And then I started, sort of like I had my educator hat on, and I started to talk to other midwives that I knew if they'd ever misinterpreted that, thinking it was transition, and it wasn't, and they said yes, they did. And so I just started to think, with my phys ed background, that of course I know there are lots of times in doing challenging things physically where people can reach a point where they lose confidence that they can do it. And it's not that it's not that they can't do it, it's that their fear or their concern or their lack of confidence. So I started to, and I know this also in counselling work, that coming to approach something that's very difficult and deep and painful, people can feel like, oh, I'm not ready to go there, or I don't think I can go there. So it's like I understood this as, I'd seen it before. So I started to talk about that separate to transition, there can be points in the labour where women reach these crises of confidence. And as I started to talk about it more, I got a lot of feedback that, yes, it's being seen. Women said that they could understand it themselves, that was happening in their labour, also that midwives were seeing it. But what was happening at that point, either it was being misinterpreted as transition, and then only to find that if they weren't really in transition, that's much harder to regroup around. Or that was the point at which the women themselves were feeling, oh, I thought I could do this, but really it's too much, and so I do need that epidural, and so the whole birth would be hijacked. So I started to talk over many years this idea of crisis of confidence, that in fact to prepare for it, to understand it is likely to happen. In fact, it's certainly much easier if it never happens. Oh, sweet. On the other hand, if you understand that it might happen and prepare for it and make sure there are people around you who can support you through it, then that's much better to do that rather than be hijacked by it because you thought it was never going to happen.
So how does someone prepare for that?
So the key thing they have to prepare for is to understand it can happen, so that they can recognise, they can sort of talk to themselves in a way. So that's what a lot of women tell me, But also the key thing is really who is with them at the birth. This is so, so important. So here we come into what I call pain dynamics. Yep. So we've got that idea of a crisis of confidence can happen. And it sort of can happen. I think it's fairly predictable. It's really at the point in the labour where the whole thing intensifies. When the hormones come in stronger and the contractions get closer together. And, that at any of those points, women can feel in the moment a bit disoriented about what they were doing isn't working now, and so on. And so hopefully many women then just can adjust themselves and to keep embracing the intensity that's building. But for a lot of women, these are the points where they start to feel like, oh, I'm just hanging together in this now, and now they're getting stronger, and so now I don't think I can do it. So that's sort of the underpinning of the crisis of confidence. So we have the crisis of confidence. So then who is with the mother, and what are they going to do during that crisis of confidence starts to become this pain dynamics, because the mother at that point, she wants out. She now feels like, I can't do it. Everybody who was telling me the epidural, that's the way to go, they were all right. That's exactly what I need now. So she wants out. She wants the drugs, even though before the labour she's saying, no, I don't want them, but now she does. And so is there anybody in that circle, firstly, who understands what's happening, who's been primed to understand that this is going to happen, and who then is able to support her through a well-supported crisis of confidence? Maybe it lasts 3 or 4 contractions. It's not like it's the whole of the labour, but they're crucial moments, because if the drugs come in, we know that's a different story then for the birth. Whereas if they can be supported through those contractions as they then get on a new groove, beautiful. So the mother, her experience of the crisis of confidence, the support people who are around, and whether they can support or whether they go into that freak out as well, and they then become the sort of enactors, if you like, of the cultural message of, oh, you poor thing, it's too much for you and you should be saved. And then also in there, and I think maybe this is a little bit different in Australia than in America, because we have a very strong role, more coming from the English model of strong role for midwives, whereas I think in America what I hear is much more obstetric nurses, But the midwife, so just to put a little bit in here, there's research done on midwives' attitudes towards pain in labour. And the key thing that the researchers found was there's sort of two different attitudes. One is more a nursing attitude, if you like, which is about pain relief. It's more of that hospital model. It's about, even though the midwife knows that there's nothing going wrong in the labour, there's no damage, there's nothing going wrong, it's just the mindset is more the poor thing, she's in pain, she's in distress, she's unnecessarily suffering. We can use these drugs, this pain relief to make her comfortable. And unfortunately, that's sort of the dominant model. Yeah.
With the Lucky Land Slots, you can get lucky just about anywhere.
This is your captain speaking. We've got clear runway and the weather's fine, but we're just going to circle up here a while and get lucky. No, nothing like that. It's just these cash prizes add up quick. So I suggest you sit back, keep your tray table upright, and start getting lucky.
Play for free at LuckyLandSlots.com. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Yeah, I haven't seen too many nurses. Some will absolutely get behind the mom, be like, you are doing it. You are fantastic. I will say I have seen more in this crisis of confidence, which happens pretty much across the board. Someone will say, do you want me to go get the anesthesiologist? Because I remember with my own birth, I did do home births, that I was just trying to think, like, who was in the room with me? I came out of my bedroom, my midwife was in my kitchen, and I just walked into my kitchen and I just said, I don't know who I'm trying to prove this to. This is ridiculous. Just get me to the hospital. I am done. I'm just like this. I had this idea in my mind and I was wrong, and just, we're done. And she just looked at me and she goes, okay, so if we do go to the hospital, what do you expect to happen? We can do, you're fine, baby's fine. And I'm just like, you're right. And I turned around and marched back in. But because her attitude was not demeaning, it wasn't like, oh, you silly person, oh, you poor woman. It was just kind of like, okay, I see this. So I really believe that, like, the people there are going to make a massive impact.
So that's the default in our setting, is that the pain relief, and I'm pretty sure in America it is as well. Mm-hmm. But there are other midwives, and you've given a beautiful example with your midwife. There are other midwives, and their philosophy is more like they consider themselves to be guardians of normal birth, and that in this context about pain, they know what we've already shared about how important the pain is actually in terms of that tip over into the hormones and so on, and that really it's a pathway into that normal physiological childbirth. So these are midwives who have the attitude of a working with pain attitude. Yeah, and so sort of the experts in pain relief are nurses and surgeons and anaesthetists and chemists probably and what have you, but the experts in working with pain, yoga teachers, midwives, doulas, personal trainers, swimming coaches, mm-hmm. gym instructors. They're experts in knowing that to, in a way, stretch the body into greater fitness or well-being, or in our case, into that openness to allow that baby to come, requires working with that intensity that the body is as the body is opening. And that there are times when that can be challenging and you need some extra support and guidance, or sometimes the midwife or the doula might need to stand in for the mother's instincts, well, now maybe this movement or that movement or water or what have you, to just get her through those few contractions until she gets on her own groove. So those pain dynamics are the crisis of confidence, who's with the mother, and are they going to be able to encourage her through, or are they going to actually save her in this way, which in the end then really hijacks that whole possibility of the birth. There's another factor, and that is the mother's attitude towards pain before she goes into labour. Yeah? We got time for me to just...
Yes, absolutely. I wanted to get to that because I remember hearing you talk about this, and I'm like, I've seen that, but you articulated it really well, because I get that a lot. Like I have some of my students be like, well, we'll wait and see. And just the way that you articulated and organized it. So yes, please, let's get to that.
Yeah, I do this a lot, and map it, usually on a whiteboard, and map it out, but let me see how it can go. So remember again already, we've got the mother in that crisis of confidence, yeah? We have then, what I would, if I was drawing this, I would have a circle around the mother, and that encompasses the image of her, what I'd call her holding circle or her facilitating circle. And inside that circle are the people that the mother is choosing to have in there. So that would be her partner generally, and maybe her doula, and maybe her sister, maybe her mother, whoever that might be. And also, if she's having a home birth, it would be her midwife in there. If she were in Australia, we have some of the midwifery group practices so that women in the hospital know they've got a continuity of care, gold standard. So the midwife might be in that circle, but oftentimes the midwife is a stranger to the mother, so she's outside that circle, yeah? And because she's outside the circle, the mother doesn't know which midwife she's got in terms of those two attitudes that I was talking about before, yeah? So that's the circle, the mother with the crisis of confidence. But then we have, I've seen over the years, I talk about these sort of 5 attitude stances about pain in labour before the mother goes into labour, yeah? When I first started to sort of see this and have a sense, I think probably if I didn't get involved in the birth scene, maybe I would have been a sociologist or something or other, seeing these sort of patterns. So it used to be that there were more women up one end. Now there are many more women up this end that I'll start with, which is that there are women who are highly motivated to avoid all pain in labour. Yeah, so these are the women who are taking the cultural message. In fact, they're proactively shaping the cultural message about, that I shouldn't have to be dealing with that barbaric pain of childbirth, that they should have sorted that out. The epidural, I think that's sorted out. That's what I'm going for. And yeah, so they're proactive. They're having a crisis of confidence long before they go into labour, and they're just not going there. They don't want to be involved or working with their body. Just be comfortable and have a baby born. Yeah, those women generally don't find me. I'm imagining they probably don't find you either. Then there are a group of women moving from there, but that group of women, a growing group of women, and certainly in Australia here with Medicare, they're very well supported to make those choices. They can easily make those choices. There's another group of women, the next group I call the status quo women. And these women tend to be very fearful about birth and not so much understanding about how they can be in touch with themselves and their own pregnancy, but really feeling that they acquiesce to the experts. They'll say things like, really, I don't know what's happening. I don't know how it works. I just need to listen to those experts. They'll tell me what to do, whether that's about pain or whether that's about anything else. So they're just listening to somebody else. And because in our culture, at least, the default model about pain is about the pain relief. So then in the labour, when she's getting a bit outside her comfort zone and into a crisis of confidence, then that's what will come her way. And in a way, those two groups of women, one much more proactively, the other more by acquiescence pathway, end up more or less in that same process of the drugs come in particular the epidural, which then that cascade of interventions and those births go down those other pathways. Yeah? Maybe some of those women find me, maybe not, I'm not sure, but not so many of the women that I work with are those women. But the next 3 groups, these are women that I'm pretty sure that you would work with and that certainly are part of the women who might come and see me. So the next group of women I call the wait and see women, as you said. So the wait and see women, they, to my understanding, have an incorrect understanding about this idea of a pain threshold. So a lot of people feel like, I've got a high pain threshold or I've got a low pain threshold, as if it's a set thing. And in fact, we know it's not really a set thing because it's really about our pain tolerance level. And our pain tolerance level can be raised or lowered by many, many factors. But for these women, the wait and see women, they don't really understand that. They just feel like, well, my pain threshold is like that. I'm going to wait and see, how does the intensity of the labour match my pain threshold? And then when I see what happens in labour, then I'll make my decisions about what I'm going to do. And pretty much we know what they're going to do, that it's not going to match their pain threshold and the drugs will come into the picture. So that's that wait and see woman, which is a pity that she doesn't understand that having particular people in that circle around her, making particular choices, would actually boost and raise her pain tolerance. She just thinks it's set, and so she's not, in a way, informed to make the sort of choices that would really make a big difference for her. You
Yes.
might get some example. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Then the next group of women are the women who I call they're aspirational. So they're aspirational for that normal physiological childbirth or natural childbirth, whatever language we want to use. They're aspirational. They're aspirational, but they're naive. So they're women who feel like, well, I'm strong and I'm a bit, absolutely, I put myself in this position before having my first baby. Phys ed teacher, fit, healthy, bring it on. Can do, without really understanding so many of the other implications. So these are these women. Yeah, can do it, blah, 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 read everything, done all my breathing classes, done this, done my yoga class, done all that. Yeah, bring it on. They're not understanding that they can't normalize that they might reach one of these crises of confidence. Even if they would hear me speaking or whatever, they'd be thinking to themselves, she hasn't got a clue. I will never reach that because I've been doing my breathing work, I've been doing this, never going to reach a point where I'm starting to whinge and whine and complain and be calling for an epidural. Never. So because of that, in a way, they often make very ill-advised choices about who's with them. So these are sometimes women who feel like they just want to have that romantic situation with their partner, just the two of us together. Yes, which is delicious. How wonderful to have that but it doesn't have the depth of really understanding of what that means. And so what happens then often in that labour is that they're both drowning. And he's trying to save her, and the way she gets saved is, of course, because he's been thinking, or the whole team. She might also have a sister in there who hasn't yet had babies and she wants to give her a brilliant experience, so she hurries up and gets pregnant and we're doing our babies together. Or her mum in there who's had terrible birth experiences because she wants to give her a healing experience. So it's like she's choosing people to be in there, not because she feels like she needs their juice and inspiration and support. She's wanting them there because she's wanting to give them this great gift of seeing a woman gloriously working with the labour and the birth of the baby. So what happens when she starts to go into a crisis of confidence? She, first of all, can't normalise that. So she's starting to feel like, oh, my God, there must be something wrong. If this was all going straight forward, I would be totally nailing this. Now, because I'm in a freak out, it must be because there's something terrible going wrong in this labour. And not only that, but her have been thinking, she's going to absolutely nail this. And now she's in one of these freakouts. They're also thinking, oh, my God, there must be something terrible, terrible going wrong. And so then unless they've got somebody, a midwife or somebody who can pull that back, pretty much that's going down that pathway of the pain relief and cascade of interventions and so on, so on. And then right on the far side, we have the women who I call, highly motivated for normal birth, and they're highly motivated to embrace pain in labour. So these are the women who understand about how important the functional physiological pain is in terms of unfolding the hormones and the instincts coming forward and so on. They also know about the social and cultural messages that are likely to undermine them, so they're making sure they've got in that support team that expertise of those midwives or the doula or somebody. They're not leaving it on the shoulders of their inexperienced partner or anybody else in there who's inexperienced. They're making sure they've got expertise to support them at those times when they're going through those challenging parts of the labour. And so if we're I could go on and on, but that's in terms of this pain dynamic. So we've got the crisis of confidence. We've got the mother's attitude before she goes into labour. And basically her attitude is giving us a signal about, is she savvy about what this means and making sure she's got the right support for when that crisis of confidence happens or not. We have the people who are in the support team, the holding circle, and what's going to happen when the crisis of confidence happens. Are they going to be able to step up and support her, or are they going to get caught in a sympathy loop and want to save her? What will that mean? And then just what those attitudes are around it. That this is what I call pain dynamics. And pretty much for those of us who see this, you can pick this long before they go into labor.
Oh yeah, I am many people with a sharp, not even sharp eye, but those that have watched enough births get a sense. Like I feel like I've kind of have a sense where things often go just from the beginning. But what would you say? And I've never found the right word, so I always bite my tongue and I do the smile and nod a lot. And maybe it's not even my place. So let's just talk birth worker to birth worker here, and whoever is listening at the community when I put it there. But again, it may not be my place, but I do have students that are in that, like that willing woman, as you talk, I'm like, they want to have the physiological birth. They have worked hard. They have studied. They have been coming to class. And then they say they want it just to be themselves and their partner. And unless their partner, again, has that keen eye to understand how to hold the space, it's a lot of pressure on the partner who may have never even seen a birth other than maybe some videos, and may not know how to read the rhythms and how to help her shift if she's starting to fray. And what do you ever say anything to that student that you work with that might say that? Is it even my place to, if I know she wants this, like, you know what I mean?
I would be saying something.
What would you say?
Yeah, so I say, okay, there's a few other things that I map out in terms of those pain dynamics that I'm saying. And I would tell those stories because that can be helpful. And certainly in terms of couples workshops, I'm always doing a lot of work on this. And the partners the partners need to get the message as well. So one of them is, of course, that even if the partners feel like they've got that space to hold her, you know, that they've been doing their yoga, and yes, when she's in that space, and when there's what women are doing when they're in that crisis of confidence is they are looking for the weakest link. They're going around and they're looking for the weakest link, and if they can see, and generally they smell the weakest link because their adrenaline is up, the fear is up, and if they can see, and it's generally the partner, they start to want to do a number on them. And I joke about this in the class and say, if you lot have been together as a couple for more than 2 years, then pretty well the guy, you could predict what is the tone of voice she's going to use, what is the look on her face going to be when she's trying to get you to get caught in a sympathy loop with her to save her from what it is that she doesn't want to do. And they all laugh because, of course, they know these are dynamics in life. So I say that's what she's going to do, and what are you going to do about it when that happens? Or for you guys, particularly I know that there can be female partners, and maybe the female partners can hold this together because they've had babies themselves or not, I don't know. But we're, of course, mainly talking about men as partners who are, they don't have a cultural background of generations of being at birth. We're asking a lot of them. So the other thing is that the guys are thinking, well, okay, I'm going to say this at that point and this and this and this, but only to find that when they're giving her their best juice, she's often totally undercutting them because he has no credibility in this. He's saying, well, just do this. And she says, well, you've been feeling all these contractions. You've been feeling the backache. You've been dealing with the contractions. He really has no credibility. So I tell some of those stories. And I also say that, if you were undertaking any other big thing in your life, whether it's, some studies or whether it is something in the physical realm, you're taking on first time you've ever done a marathon, or when you're wanting to achieve, you're wanting to finish it, or you're doing a PhD, or you're doing your master's, or you're taking on a new job, or you're on the basketball court, and you're struggling, which might be akin to our crisis of confidence idea. Would you be turning to your loved one who is on the side of the court, or who is at home, or who is, at the finish line of the marathon? Would you be turning to them who have no expertise whatsoever in what it is that you're trying to achieve, and expect that they are going to be the person to give you the extra bit of juice or gems to let you know how to get through this part that you're facing now? Would you leave something big that you want to achieve to your partner who doesn't have the experience and expect that they're going to be the one to give you what you need to get through it? Or will you be loving to have expertise around you at those points if you're feeling like you don't know how to do the rest of that mountain climb or that hike or that yoga class or that whatever it is? You're not relying on them, but you're loving the fact that when you finish the yoga class and you've ticked all the things that you wanted to achieve with the help and support of somebody who's an expert in that, you're loving that your partner is thrilled for you and is celebrating that capacity, or at the end of the fun run, or at the end of the bushwalk, or at the end of the PhD, or at the end. But along the path, you've used some expertise to really help you to achieve what it is, a tough gig, to achieve it with some expertise around you for crucial points. And then the celebration of in our case, the baby and all the hormones and everything, that's where we want that beautiful, rather than relying on somebody at crucial points who really don't, unless they've been at a whole lot of births themselves before, don't really know. And I guess another part of that is to reiterate that those crises of confidence, if they're well supported, they're contained. You would know this as a doula. Mm-hmm. So if I'm at a birth, I might go on for 10 hours, but maybe in reality, in a way, maybe I might do 10 minutes of really active work. And that's those points where the crisis of confidence might be starting to unfold. I step in a bit closer, eyes and conversation and words and encouragement and smiling and celebrating how potent and how powerful her body is, and a bit of suggestion about maybe now this, maybe now that, and just help her to move through those few contractions. Then she's back onto a groove, and then I sit back in the corner, have another cup of tea and watch the couple do that beautiful birth dance for another 2 hours, and then maybe another bit of a moment starts to happen where you feel like you come in a bit closer. So it's a beautiful dance, isn't it, like that? So what we see, and the research backs it, is that in births where there is that expertise in the circle, that partners get beautifully supported in that as well. And if you like, in those crises of confidence where it's a bit more challenging, and we step up and can model a particular way of being in that helps to soothe the partner. And then when we step back, they pick that up and continue moving along in that vein until or if another challenge comes, and we might step in a little while. So it enhances the intimacy actually between the couple, and enhances that capacity for them to be sharing those hormones, to have that expertise in that circle.
That's a good way to say it, because I've always been hesitant to open my mouth thinking like, is it my place? I also think what you're describing with the doula comes from also doula experience. I know when I look back at my path of being a doula, I don't think I was as good about helping the partner get in. I think I came in, I'm like, I'm the doula, here I have to help. And it took some finessing and some observation to learn how to pull back and to enhance that. So I also think that's if I recommend a doula, it has to be someone that can respect that the couple does want that bond, and the doula's more in the background.
Of course, sometimes that can be the intention, but it's a very tough labor, and sometimes you just really force much more than you might otherwise have been. Absolutely.
This has been amazing. I'm loving everything. We could probably go on and on and on, but it's almost 10 o'clock here, and I'm getting exhausted. But I want people to know where they can find your work, because it's fantastic.
So I've mentioned that first book of mine, which is called, you think I should know it exactly, Birth with Confidence, Savvy Choices for Normal Birth. And that book really talks, with lots of stories to illustrate and what have you, really in more depth than most of the things that we've been touching on today. So that's that book. And I think in America, you can find it on Amazon, either as a hard, paper, a real paper, or a, online, whatever. You can tell my age is coming through.
An ebook.
Yep. So there's that. Also, they could go onto my Birthing Wisdom So either Rhea Dempsey Birthing Wisdom, my Facebook page where I post a number of things, or my website, which has got some of this information as well, and some articles and things around some of these things. But also I'm in the midst now of writing another book. And there's quite a few crises of confidence going on for me about that. But the next book that I'm writing, and again, if we use what we've talked about already, that idea of a crisis of confidence. So I guess in that first book, and in the main as we're talking about it, I'm saying that sort of crisis of confidence just can come out of the intensity of the physiological effort. Yeah. But for some women, their life story or their present life story or whatever might mean that crisis of confidence has some more fuel in it, or, more psychological, emotional pain, if you like. Not just the functional physiological pain of their body working, but something of their heart and feelings being opened that can. So I'm talking much more about the emotional, psychological aspects and how they can be supported, what they might look like, and how, of course, it's so important to be attending to that and to be supporting women across that labour so that they're really in a robust state once that baby's born, to be getting on being that beautiful, strong mum who can nurture that baby into its best development.
That sounds
so
wonderful.
That's the second book. And I'm not sure yet, maybe hopefully by the end of this year, but if anybody's interested in that, they certainly should stay in touch with my Facebook page or something, and I'll let you know.
Good.
You'll probably hear the yell from us.
Well, I'll make sure that we have your website and all your social media so that people can follow along and read your articles. I went on your website and I read many of your articles. I listened to your interview on the Birth Summit. So I hope the community is getting as enthralled as I have been with your work, because I think it's important.
Thank you, Deb.
Well, thank you. Enjoy your day. Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
This has been an episode of Yoga Birth Babies, produced by Prenatal Yoga Center. You can catch us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Periscope. I'm Deb Flaschenberg. Thanks for listening.
Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on ChumbaCasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Coincidence? I think not. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere, even at 30,000 feet. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's ChumbaCasino.com and live the Chumba life.
No purchase necessary. VGW. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.